Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we'll be looking at the importance of communities, discussing the biotic and abiotic factors in the environment that can affect communities and population sizes, and we'll also discuss the interdependence which arises in ecosystems. So as we begin, we need to think about a number of specific definitions. And there are a number of words that you may use in everyday life that have actually very specific definitions when it comes to ecology. So organisms, even solitary ones, are always part of a population, and populations of different species will form communities. And the population within a community are all interdependent. They depend on each other for a variety of things, including food, shelter, pollination, seed dispersal, and so they form an ecosystem. So these words, population, community, and ecosystem, all have very specific definitions when it comes to ecology. The population is the number of organisms of the same species living together in the same area at the same time. A community is all the organisms that live and interact in an ecosystem. So in effect, a community is all the different populations of the different species within your area. And the ecosystem itself is an environment and all the organisms living in it, all interacting together, like a tree or a lake or a rainforest. So an ecosystem is in effect the environment and the community. All of them working together. So as we've just said, an ecosystem is made up of a community of organisms interacting with each other and the environment. Now, living factors in an environment or an ecosystem are known as the biotic factors, and the non-living factors are known as abiotic factors. So we're going to go through a list now of all the abiotic factors within the environment that can affect a population size, and we're going to briefly explain how these abiotic non-living factors can affect the ecosystems and the communities and populations that live in there. And then we're going to have a look at the biotic factors and how they can affect population sizes within the ecosystem as well. So, as we've said, an abiotic factor are the non-living factors within the environment. And the first one on our list is light intensity. Now, as you should already know at this point in your GCSE course, light is one of the limiting factors that affects photosynthesis. So light intensity also affects the distribution of plants and therefore the animals that feed on them. Different plants are adapted to different light levels. Some adaptations to low light levels include having more chlorophyll or more chloroplasts in your cells, or having bigger leaves. For example, nettles like these that you see in the UK, growing in the shade, will have bigger leaves because they're trying to capture more of the light in a low light intensity environment. Light intensity is also linked to the breeding cycle of many plants and animals. For example, the night or the day length will affect when a particular plant may flower, or when it produces its seeds, and that will therefore affect the animals that may well feed on the nectar in the flower or feed on the seeds. So light intensity will have a big effect on the plant density, where we find plants, the size of those plants, and therefore where we find all the animals and the rest of the food chain that relies upon those plants. The second factor we need to think about is temperature. Now, temperature is one of the limiting factors that affects photosynthesis. So temperature also affects the distribution of plants and therefore animals. For example, in the Arctic, the low temperature is always a limiting factor, so the plants are small, and this affects the number of herbivores that can survive, and so the number of carnivores within the community. Now, I will be posting in the comments below a number of links to other little videos which will support this presentation. For example, the BBC for Planet Earth have shown a fantastic video about caribou living in the Arctic Circle being hunted by wolves. Now, the caribou live in huge numbers, tens of millions, all roaming together in one giant herd. However, that herd must move from place to place to place. If you compare the size of a herd to the size of the environment that they live in, that herd is relatively small compared to a relatively large environment. And the reason they must keep moving from place to place is that the leaves of the plants that they are eating are tiny. Because temperature is a limiting factor, so the photosynthesis is slow, the amount of glucose produced is relatively small, and therefore each individual plant can only produce a small amount of mass that the caribou will feed on. And therefore the wolves that feed on the caribou also have to roam over huge areas in order to try and find the caribou and find the food. So compared to the very large, vast areas of this Arctic tundra, the density of the plant mass and therefore the caribou mass and the wolf mass per area is very, very small. And all of that is affected by the abiotic factor, temperature. The third abiotic factor on our list is moisture level. Now, in some countries, there is an abundant amount of water in the form of rain, for example, in tropical countries like Thailand or Indonesia, or in temperate countries like the UK or Europe, we tend to get plenty of water. But in desert countries like the UAE, the moisture levels and the water levels are incredibly low and are therefore factors that will limit the density of plants that you can find in the environment. And you can see here a relatively small number of plants within the environment. Even if we have had rain, the number of plants doesn't increase greatly. So water levels will affect the density and distribution of living organisms like plants and animals. So it explains why plants and animals are relatively rare in deserts due to the low moisture levels. However, many seeds remain dormant, and when it does rain, the seeds quickly germinate and the plants will grow and reproduce quickly while the water is available. So if it does rain in the UAE, for example, if you see the desert the night before the rain and then a few days after the rain, you will see large numbers of seeds germinating, plants growing, and within a week or two they'll have put out flowers, they'll be reproducing, and then pollination will occur, and the flowers and the plants will produce their seeds, which will then go back into the desert to wait for the next set of rains. So the life cycle of the plants of the desert can be very, very short to take advantage of water when it does come. Next on our list is soil mineral content. The level of minerals in the soil, like nitrates, will have a large impact on the distribution of plants because nitrates are needed to combine with glucose to form amino acids and therefore proteins. Most plants cannot live in areas with low nitrate concentrations in the soil. Plants living in areas with low nitrates need to have adaptations to be able to increase the nitrates and therefore the amino acids available to them. Here's a couple of examples: the pitcher plant and the Venus flytraps. They're both adapted to catch and digest animals with enzymes, and therefore they can break down the proteins within those animals and utilize the amino acids and the nitrates within those proteins within their own growth. So if you are going to live in a low mineral, low nitrate area, you must be well adapted to that area because most plants cannot. Next factor is pH. Again, it's an abiotic factor, non-living, and the pH of the soil can also affect the growth and distribution of plants. pH can also affect microbes in the soil and therefore the rate of decay. So this will affect the release of minerals back into the soil. A soil with low pH, very acidic, will inhibit decay and therefore decay will happen much, much slower. So wind intensity is another abiotic factor on our list. Not just the wind intensity, but the wind direction. It will affect the growth and the distribution of plants. In areas with strong prevailing winds, the shape of the tree and the whole landscape can be affected. Increases in wind speed also increase the rate of transpiration in plants, and this can affect water uptake and the growth of plants as well. And oxygen availability, again another abiotic factor. The availability of oxygen has a huge impact on water living organisms. Some invertebrates can survive in water with very low oxygen levels. And some of these organisms, such as the aquatic sludge worm, they're known as indicator species because they can survive in such low oxygen levels that they indicate to scientists that there is a low oxygen in that waterway. And if there's a low oxygen level within the river, then you know that the river is highly polluted. Fish are the opposite scale. They are high oxygen level organisms. They need a lot of oxygen in order to live. So they indicate that a river is healthy if you're finding a lot of fish in there, because it's indicating to scientists that there is a high oxygen level and a low pollution level. So we can use these organisms as indicator species, and this is linked into the process of eutrophication that you'll study in Unit B18. The final one on our list is carbon dioxide availability. Again, it's an abiotic factor and it's a limiting factor affecting the rate of photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide levels will also affect the distribution of plants and therefore animals. Now, mostly the carbon dioxide level in our atmosphere is evenly distributed. However, there are some animals that are directly affected by carbon dioxide levels, like the mosquito. And mosquitoes are attracted to animals by those high carbon dioxide levels. So just by you breathing out at night, producing more carbon dioxide around your body, that will attract the mosquito which wishes to feed upon you. Now, we also have a list of living factors that will affect the distribution of species within an ecosystem. The main ones are food availability. When there is plenty of food, organisms can feed and therefore breed successfully. But when food is in short supply, organisms will often struggle to survive and therefore will not be breeding, which of course is going to change the population sizes of the species that we're discussing. Pathogens, again, another biotic living factor in the environment. When a new pathogen or a new parasite emerges, organisms will often have no resistance to the disease. And a new pathogen can lead to a decrease in the population size, or even cause a population to go extinct within the community, which can have a devastating effect on the entire ecosystem. So two biotic factors there that will affect population sizes. Here's two more. New predators. Organisms often have no defense against new predators. For example, the dodo went extinct when the rat was introduced into the islands of Mauritius. The rat would eat the eggs of the dodo. The dodo was nesting on the ground. It had no adaptations to try and avoid this new predator, and so quickly it went extinct because all of its eggs were being eaten. Another issue, another biotic factor, is interspecific competition. Now, interspecific competition is competition between different species. A new species may outcompete another species, causing a decrease in their population size and extinction. In the UK, for example, the American grey squirrel is currently outcompeting the UK native red squirrel, seen here, and the red squirrel population has over the last 100 years dramatically decreased, and indeed they're only now found in a handful of areas in Wales, the northwest and Scotland. They have lost their range across the whole of the UK. All species live in an ecosystem, and it's made up of complex communities of animals and plants and other organisms that are all dependent on each other and adapted to their particular conditions. The sun is the ultimate source of energy in an ecosystem, and photosynthesis converts this energy into the chemical energy found in all biological molecules, with carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, DNA, etc. The energy and the materials and the atoms, like carbon, nitrogen and water are constantly being recycled through the living world in cycles that often rely on microorganisms. This is an example of interdependence. So there's lots of examples of interdependence within an ecosystem. Plants photosynthesizing, animals consuming other plants and each other, animals pollinating plants, animals using plant material like twigs and leaves to build nests and shelters, animals using material like fur and hair and dung and saliva to build nests and shelters, plants using materials generated from the decay of dead animals and animal droppings. Different animals and plant species will compete and rely on each other for resources, and this is the interdependence. If one species is removed from a community, it can have a wide-ranging and unexpected consequences. A species which has the biggest effect when they are removed from an ecosystem is known as a keystone species. For example, removing sea otters from the ecosystem led to the overrunning of marine ecosystems by sea urchins, which the sea otters were previously eating and controlling. Wolves have been reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park, and their reintroduction has reduced the number of deer population sizes, which has allowed a huge increase in natural biodiversity in those areas. When the wolves were removed, the natural increase in the deer populations led to fewer and fewer niches that were able to support a wide range of organisms. So the level of biodiversity in Yellowstone Park dramatically decreased because of the removal of wolves. What scientists are looking to find out is, are the communities in an ecosystem stable? If the environmental factors in an ecosystem are relatively stable, perhaps changing in a regular and predictable manner, for example the changes of the seasons in the UK, then the community of living organisms in the ecosystem will also be relatively stable and in balance, and the number of species and the population size of those species will remain relatively stable with little change. Communities like these are known as stable communities, and stable communities can absorb change within limits. For example, a falling tree might allow more light to reach the forest floor, and this will allow seedlings to grow. When a large stable community is lost, it cannot be easily replaced. So examples of stable communities include tropical rainforests, ancient oak woodlands, and coral reefs. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Look out for the links to the other videos, for example, the wolves changing rivers in Yellowstone National Park, that I will put into the comment section below. And I hope that you have enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe to the channel and comment and let me know what you've learned. Thank you very much.